Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where on this podcast, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. Now, if you have not listened to the last episode with Stein, you definitely need to. It was enjoyable treating him, helping him through that entire process, and you will enjoy his story if you haven't heard it yet. If you have, I hope that encourages you to take action, whatever that may look like. Reach out to us and allow us to help you finding a provider in your area. Just know that there are solutions to these problems. And just as Stein is able to testify to that, if we start this journey and we put the principles in place, the healing should come. And we've seen all types of headaches and migraines, some of the most debilitating cases, the most challenging cases, people that have flown all over the country, all over the world to find relief, have come here and found the results they're looking for. And so we would love to help you as well. And we appreciate every patient, but especially Stein, as he trusted us with his care, and we don't take that lightly. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about three things that are, as we define, are going to be helpful in understanding. So you understanding how, three things. So what led to you experiencing your symptoms? What are the things that lead to the triggers, I guess we could say, that lead to one day being a headache day and the other day potentially not? And then what are the things that sort of perpetuate the problem and that are ongoing, okay? So we're going to lay out this timeline and talk about all the different factors that we see. And it's not going to be a comprehensive list. So we're going to talk about a lot of the things. If you don't hear some of your personal story in here, just know that there are other factors outside of what we talk about in this 20 to 30 minute podcast. But so the three names for these things are antecedents, and these are things that predispose you to the particular like dysfunction. In this case, we're going to call it the headache or the migraine that you're dealing with, and these antecedents have delayed impacts, and so you experience and you have the antecedent prior to you actually feeling, acknowledging, being aware of the symptoms themselves. So there's a latent or delayed effect when we're talking about antecedents, okay? So we're going to make a list of antecedents, then we're going to make a list of triggers. Triggers are things that activate or precipitate or actually promote the problem itself, okay? So we have dysfunction, you have the pain, you have the aura, the numbness, tingling, the brain fog, and we're going to talk about the things that have more an immediate effect on your symptoms. Those would be triggers. And then we're going to talk about mediators. So mediators are the things that will perpetuate this dysfunction, and they'll sort of continue to kindle the fire of the head pain, whatever your symptoms are. They'll continue to keep you in that state as time goes on. All right. So we have the before, we have what activates it, and then we have what perpetuates it. Okay. So prior to, activating it, and then perpetuating it. All right. So first, antecedents. And I guess before we jump into these three things, the overarching picture of what we're going to be talking about is looked at through the lens of a physical therapist, so myself being a physical therapist, who specializes in treating the neck, jaw, and shoulders in the context of headaches and migraines, okay? And so we're looking at an overlooked, most of the time it's a neck issue, primarily a neck issue, and then we also are looking at jaw, shoulder tension, all right? So the idea here is that we're interacting with people that have overlooked neck, jaw, shoulder problems. And so we're going to talk about, as far as antecedents, these are things that led up to these problems being a reality. Now, like I've said before on the podcast, about 40% or so of people that we see here at Novera don't actually realize that they have a neck problem. I just talked to someone yesterday who has debilitating symptoms about once a week, feels stuck on taking medication, and primary care neurology hasn't been able to provide an answer as to why. And so this was their first step into finding an alternative solution outside of medication. And when I asked if they were aware that their neck could be a problem at all, like even a little bit, or if it would make sense at all, if I could explain it, the answer was no. And the interesting thing is, just within a 30-second evaluation, what I'll call like a screen of this patient's neck, it was very apparent that there was a high level of sensitivity and significant restriction dysfunction barely touched this patient's neck, and just a significant amount of pain, almost a sense of anxiety of if that's pushed on, that is going to cause a headache, like immediately. And it's profound that someone can go years, decades, see multiple providers, put lots of effort into solving this problem, and be unaware, like to the point where looking at me like I'm kind of crazy when I say this is likely your neck that's causing your forehead or your eye or your temple to hurt. Okay. So we see that all the time. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm sure there are some listeners that found this podcast and they think, okay, the Headache Doctor podcast, I have headaches, I'm going to listen to this. And they're unaware that their neck could be a problem. So we're going to talk about antecedents, triggers, and mediators. In the context, we're going to assume that if you have head or facial pain of any type, and that includes the types of diagnoses like vestibular migraine, atypical migraine, these migraines that don't necessarily have pain as the dominant symptom. We're going to talk about this as a neck issue. We're going to talk about other things that might trigger or be mediators as well. But okay, so first off, antecedents. A couple things that I think culturally at large, we can say most people are not going to move as much as they should. So prolonged poor posturing. Maybe you work a desk job. Maybe it's, in college you were studying up late at night in funky positions on your bed, hunched over a desk, using a laptop on your lap. Whatever it may be, those postures for prolonged periods of time could be antecedents. This isn't the other thing I should say is this list. It's not as if one element of this is true to you. It's not a one-to-one. Not one element matches one patient and that's it. Each of these is going to play a role in most people's stories. Okay, so there's overlap here. So prolonged poor posturing. And that can start as a kid. I mean, think of phones, iPads, doing homework on your bed. Kids typically don't have like a proper desk setup. So if they're going home and doing homework, it just sort of, maybe it's at the kitchen table, which would be better, but oftentimes it's like in their room. And so that starts at a young age. Our heads are heavy. And so asking our neck to just sit in one position, forward head position, and hold our head up, it's asking a lot of the neck. The neck wants to move. It wants to be dynamic, and so that adds stress over time. Different sports like gymnastics, potentially football. I think in female athletes especially, it's dance and gymnastics that are sort of I would highlight because you're tumbling, you're moving, your neck is whipping your head around different positions. You're doing flips, cartwheels, somersaults, and so we've seen several times young females come in with these symptoms, these headaches or migraines, and they've been involved with dance or gymnastics. Like even jumping on a trampoline can be kind of a lot on the neck. And so it's not as if just being a kid is a problem, but we have to be aware of how much stress we're placing through the body, and sometimes certain sports and gymnastics and dance and like jumping on a trampoline they can be things that we just need to be aware of because they could be antecedents. Again, these aren't things that when you do them, you feel pain. These are things that have an impact on your neck becoming dysfunctional that eventually leads to headaches or migraines. If you have repeated head or neck trauma, this could relate to sports. This could be you just were kind of clumsy as a kid and fell all the time. Feels like moms say that a lot about certain kids that have headaches, and they say I just remember they would fall down the stairs, or they're always hitting their head, or that sort of thing. If you have multiple car accidents, if you had whiplash injuries from sports, if there were different things in your life that led to just like repeated head or neck trauma, it doesn't have to be like a scenario where it was just so bad and you had a headache afterwards and you just remember it as like, oh, that's when it started. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like you got a few concussions, your neck felt okay, but you had to sit out of the game. Or you're riding a horse and you fell off and like you were fine, but you were a little sore the next couple of days. Like the things that you assume your body recovers fully from, but maybe there's a little bit of an impact that carries on past the quote unquote healing time of maybe a couple weeks or so. Prolonged stress is definitely one. If you this is emotional stress. If you're in a stressful work environment, if there's personal life stress, things like that can definitely increase the amount of tension you're carrying, make it harder for your body and your autonomic nervous system to go through the parasympathetic, sympathetic, so rest and digest, fight or flight, and it can make it so your body doesn't interact as well with pain signals, things like that. And then we have things like poor diets. If you're feeding your body foods that are naturally going to be more inflammatory, put stress on your GI system, that can lead into the rest of our body's systems being under a certain level of stress. And so there are certain patients that their gut health is poor enough that they have this sort of inflammation it's almost visible. They have sort of blotchy or skin, and you touch them or just barely touch them, and it becomes red and looks inflamed. That sort of thing could be a gut health issue. And so if there's a poor diet that someone has over a long period of time, and oftentimes it's this isn't necessarily our expertise here, but this isn't necessarily like, oh, I eat junk food all the time and I have like a 6-pack of soda a day. It can be much more subtle than that, but the gut might need to be healed from sort of a prolonged, what I'll call like neglect of the GI system. And then, so just to be clear on that, because that may sound a little harsh, our culturally in the United States, and what we see as clean eating is oftentimes it lacks a level of education that most people they need to dive deeper to truly understand. And so I would say most people, even if we're pursuing or thinking like we're eating healthy, there's probably a few more layers of that they actually need to dive into. And that's where like functional medicine comes into play. These providers can be very helpful in helping someone understand what their gut health looks like and what it can take to repair it. I personally am speaking from experience because whether it's my kids or my own family or myself, I've realized talking to these other providers that it's not as simple as just like cutting out fast food. Like there's extra steps and processes and considerations that need to be in there. So anyway, so poor diet could be an antecedent. Repetitive activities, let's say you work a job where you're like a dental hygienist and you're always like leaning to the left or the right. And that repetitive activity, that repetitive posture is something that, you can do it for years and feel fine, but it may eventually lead to you having these symptoms of headaches or migraines. Okay, and then we have triggers. So triggers, like we defined earlier, are things that have an immediate effect. Triggers in our headache and migraine world are known. Okay, so people seem to know their triggers. Not everyone. I mean, we have a lot of people that are familiar with the term trigger, but they don't have the luxury of understanding what their triggers are. They just say, the pain seems random. I can't track it. There's no pattern. And they have a hard time understanding their triggers. But what could be happening there is you're just kind of so sensitive to so many things. You're always kind of on the verge of a headache. And so it feels like any little thing will tip you over the edge. And it's hard to discern what that thing was because we're introducing our bodies to so many different types of physical, emotional stresses throughout the day that it could be any number of things. And that's just because that tension level might be so high. But some triggers might be emotional stress, a life event, something that is emotionally stressful. So that's different than physical stress, but emotional stress, family member passes away, you lose a job, some major life event. And people typically communicate these things. They connect them to the onset of their symptoms. And so we do have to oftentimes educate people that the emotionally stressful things in life can lead to you having the onset of this headache. And even though that stressful event might go away, your headache might continue. And that's where we get into mediators. But triggers, they impact you in that moment. They will kind of start the symptoms. We have also physical stress. So physical stress could look like something that is relatively benign, something that you've maybe done before and maybe a bunch of times, but it hits a point where I'll call it the tipping point. Okay. So your cup's filled up and then it kind of starts to overflow, and whatever that event is that starts to overflow it would be the triggering event. So this could be something like you camp and you sleep on the ground. Okay. Like your neck's in some funny position, you're restless, and you wake up and you're like, wow, I have a bad headache. It could be travel. You fly to Europe or just domestically, and you're on the plane, you sleep, your neck's in a funny position, and you wake up and you're like, wow, I have a headache, and it just doesn't go away. Or you have a headache, and then it just like seems to be much more frequent from that time on. So a physical stress or an emotional stress, you can, let's say an exercise routine. A lot of people that we see will note that they increase their exercise routine, or they get a headache when they go on long runs, or when they do shoulders as a workout, resistance training, they're lifting weights, shoulders or back or bench press, or they get their heart rate up. So all those things are triggers. They're adding physical stresses to the body, which lead to that tipping point, and the cup is overflowing. All right, we've also excuse me. All right, we've also got things like car accidents, and so these are pretty obvious. Like if you're in a car accident and you have a whiplash injury, you hit your head, and you have a headache after. That's pretty obviously going to be like a trigger. It's the event that immediately led to these symptoms happening. This could be any sort of head or neck trauma. These events can be the antecedents, but they can also be the triggers. The difference is the antecedent would be that you don't necessarily have the headache after, but it impacts your body in a way that eventually leads to you having these symptoms. And then the trigger, again, pushes you over the edge, and then you have the symptoms. So we're going to see some overlap here. Hormonal changes. This is less of a physical change, but hormonally, a lot of people will have estrogen. So women will have estrogen levels that fluctuate, and you'll see an impact in estrogen impacts our pain thresholds. And so as estrogen levels drop, become more susceptible to the pain, and you would experience a headache. So that would be a trigger. Barometric pressure changes as well. So we have cold front coming in, we have rain, we have snow, we have wind, barometric pressure drops, and that is going to impact more at the joint level. The joints have pressure in them, and then if that pressure gradient increases, the joint's going to be a little bit more sensitive and stiff, increasing tension. That would be a trigger. We have other examples of like dehydration, starvation. So your body just it's trying to manage this neck tension, and then if you dehydrate it or starve it, you don't eat for a while, then you feel it. Okay, so that could be a trigger. It directly impacts it. So immediately you start to feel the symptoms. All right, so there's definitely more triggers. If you didn't hear your trigger in there, like food is definitely one of them too. So again, going back to gut health, if you eat certain foods that can trigger your headache or migraine, alcohol is a big one, certain cheeses, things like that. So, and then we have mediators. So this is the last category. So these perpetuate the dysfunction, okay? So we have the antecedents, we have the triggers, and then we have mediators. And just a real quick side note, the reason we're talking about all these is because once you become aware of them, you can change them, okay? So a lot of the things we've talked about are physical stresses, and you can move more. You can, get up from your desk and stand. You can put your body in different postures throughout the day. You can incorporate maybe a dialed down exercise plan or a specific exercise plan to improve shoulder conditioning and tolerance so that you don't get a headache every time you do shoulder shrugs or something like that. Anyway, so mediators are going to be these factors that prolong the dysfunction. Okay, they perpetuate it. So again, some overlap here, but prolonged stress from work. So emotional stress from work. If those stresses of life don't go away, they can perpetuate the symptoms. And then again, the physical side of that is like the posturing at your workstation. What are the positions you're putting your body in throughout the day? And are they negatively impacting the amount of stress and load that you're carrying through your neck and shoulders? And so we want to be aware of those, and we want to change those. We want to take them out as much as we can. Poor health, diet, lack of exercise. So just general health. That's something we look at here at Novera. And if someone has, if they're not exercising at all, we want them to start exercising. There's a lot of benefits to exercise. If their diet needs to be corrected, improved, we want them to think holistically and mindfully about the foods that they're eating. Some other ones that maybe have less control over. So moms caring for little ones. I mean, you have to, pick up your kiddos. You're probably waking up throughout the night. You're carrying heavy bags, diaper bags, whatever. And dads are involved in this too, of course. But caring for little ones is definitely something that will increase the amount of tension that you're carrying and be categorized as a mediator. And we have things like high work demands. So we've had surgeons like OBGYNs. We've had dental hygienists, different types of providers, dentists that have gone through our process, and their work environment would be a mediator. It will perpetuate the tension that they're carrying. And so we need to modify that and be aware of it. Oftentimes we're just filling up their cup or their day with good, healthy stuff. And so even when they have to perform their work duties and it does increase tension, it's not enough for them to feel that as a trigger per se, or as a headache. It doesn't lead to that headache. Other things like use of a cell phone. We all have, these computers in our pockets, and so we're reliant on them for so many things: directions, weather, connecting with friends, social media, news outlets. So there's so many different ways that we're using our phones, and so a lot of our day can be spent looking down. Computer counts for that as well. So that puts our head in a forward head position, and I've said it before, but even a 15-degree forward head posture, so just a slight head tilt forward, doubles the perceived weight on our neck. And so when we think about antecedents, triggers, mediators, we want to understand that maybe you have a hard time in your own situation deciphering like which of these is impacting me. But just know, like, if the antecedents, for example, if I described if some of those antecedents were true for you, just know, like, okay, these things likely have a negative impact, even though I don't feel them. So it's hard to evaluate some of these things in real time because antecedents won't necessarily lead to symptoms. Okay, so we just have to know that they're not good for our bodies, and that's true for a lot of things in life. Like we don't, drink as much pop as we want, or we don't, we don't eat whatever we want because we know that like it's going to lead to a negative result. And so same with physically in our life, and then emotional stresses, of course, if there's ways to managing those. And then triggers are those things that are usually a little bit more apparent. And so if you can find those triggers, then avoid them, or find a way to increase your body's threshold for tolerating them if they're things you can't avoid. And then the mediators, of course, are definitely things, and especially as we take someone through our process, these are the things that we want to educate people on so that they have continued success. And so if we were to take someone through our process, we work on their neck, they're feeling better, and then after the 2 months that we see them, or 6 weeks, they just continue on their own, and we didn't educate them on any of these mediators, they might pop right back to where they were within months of seeing us. And so that's where like education, empowerment, like on this podcast, it's an essential part of what we do in helping people improve their situation. Okay, so there you have it. Antecedents, triggers, mediators. You have some new vocabulary when you're talking to providers. You have some new vocabulary in your own journey, in your own health journey. This has been helpful for me as I went through these different categories and thinking through it. It'll be a part of kind of how we operate and how we think as providers here at Novera. And hopefully it's a very helpful element of your journey as well. Thank you all so much for listening to the Headache Doctor podcast. Just a reminder, you are our marketing avenue. And so if you leave us a 5-star review, if you share this with a friend or family member who could benefit from hearing it, that is how we're going to grow and get the word out. Thank you all so much as we continue on this journey of empowering and educating everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. We'll see you next time.